Herzlich willkommen alle miteinander. Heute in etwas ungewohnterer Umgebung. Wir sind wieder im Whiskyhort, nicht mehr im Filmstudio. Das steht zurzeit nicht zur Verfügung. Deshalb sind wir auf die ehemals vertraute Umgebung ausgewichen. Ich werde zwischendurch das, was ich sage, auch immer kurz ins Englische übersetzen, damit der Matt Hastings uns auch versteht, weiß, worum es geht. Und ja, für euch zunächst der Hinweis noch, die Sendung wird wieder aufgezeichnet. Wer nicht dabei sein möchte, nicht anschließend mit auf YouTube oder Facebook zu sehen sein möchte, der kann seine Kamera auch deaktivieren. Alle sind stumm geschaltet, bis auf Matt, Massa und mich. Wir werden die Veranstaltung moderieren, beziehungsweise Matt wird uns einiges erzählen über Nc'nean. Und ihr habt die Möglichkeit, den Chat zu nutzen, um Fragen zu stellen, um Anmerkungen loszuwerden. Ich werde das damit einfließen lassen in die Tonspur. So, Matt, I welcome the people around, tell them how it works today. You, Masa, and I were not muted. All other guests are muted, and they can use the chat. And I will pick the questions and their quotes and put it into the voice, so Wonderful. You can answer. Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, thank you. A warm welcome to you. It's very nice to have this tasting with you. I'm really interested in Nc'nean. I think you produce very fine whiskey, and maybe you tell us a lot of things we don't know about Nc'nean, and yeah, it's you.
I will try my best. Thank you very much for having me, first of all. As I said, any excuse for me to come and sit in my shed and drink whiskey is an excuse I'm willing to take. My name's Matt. I am the blender, brand ambassador, photographer, videographer, cleaner, everything for Nc'nean. I do a lot of things. Look after all the UK sales. As I mentioned, I blend all the liquid together. Very happily fell into that position. And I host these training sessions, and we talk about Nc'nean and what we want to do. Now, I'm a big proponent of getting started as soon as possible. So if you want to grab your first dram, I believe it's your wee dram, and we'll pour that out and we'll have a little taste, just because no one likes doing a tasting with a dry mouth.
Ich blende mich zwischendurch immer mal wieder ein. Ich weiß nicht, wie euch das recht ist, wie ihr mit dem Englischen zurechtkommt. Ich versuche es mal kurz zusammenzufassen, was Matt erzählt. Er ist also Brand Ambassador, Blender, macht die Fotografie, Videografie rund um Nc'nean, und da er ein Freund ist, immer direkt einzusteigen, wollen wir schon mal mit dem Wee Dram beginnen. Und zwar ist das der Nc'nean Botanical Spirit, den ihr als erstes ins Glas bekommt. Und Matt wird uns dazu sicherlich einiges erzählen. Matt, please tell us about this Botanical Spirit.
I'd love to, yeah. First of all, my job title sounds way more impressive in German. That's fantastic. Very happy with that. Really long. So, our Botanical Spirit. So, like every other distillery in Scotland, especially a new distillery in Scotland, there is at least a 3-year and a day period where you can't be making whiskey because it's not old enough yet. You can't be selling that. And every other distillery that goes through this process, they go down one of two routes. It's like they either release their new make spirits or they make something else. They make a gin, for example. And we didn't want to do either of those things. The limit of a new make spirit is something that maybe you want to taste once, and it's certainly interesting in a tasting like today, but it's not a commercially viable product. It's not something that people are going to come back and keep ordering over and over again. And making a gin didn't really appeal to us just because it's what everyone else is doing. There's a lot of gin in the world. We don't think there necessarily needs to be any more. So what could we do as a stopgap sort of between those two, but also highlight the creativity and the innovation within Nc'nean? So we settled on this Botanical Spirit. It was born out of tasting our New Make Spirit straight off the stills and being really impressed. Our New Make, as you'll taste shortly, even though it's down at 40, it's lovely, it's bright, it's fresh, it's creamy, very floral, and it's interesting and engaging. So we wanted to create a product that you could taste all those elements of Nc'nean with, but something is, like I say, commercially viable, interesting, something that you will continue to use and enjoy over the life of a bottle rather than just having a taste. So we settled on this Botanical Spirit. We take our New Make Spirit for the whiskey, and rather than putting it into cask, we collect 10 botanicals and we redistill like you would a gin, but not using a neutral base, using a richer whiskey-esque base to create this kind of hybrid spirit. It sits in a category of its own. There isn't another botanical spirit like us. There's similar things, like you've got Lindel's Abbey du Aqua Vitae, and I think it's stylistically, weight-wise, not dissimilar to something like a Genevieve, where it's got a little bit more character and a bit more barley influence to it. And it's a lot more floral. There's very little juniper. We do use juniper in the recipe, but it's a light touch. The 10 botanicals we use, I break them down into 3 categories. So we have the 4 traditional gin botanicals. It's the recipe to Tanqueray, which is juniper, licorice, coriander, and angelica. We then use 2 sort of non-traditional gin botanicals in grapefruit and chamomile. And then bringing it back to sort of a sense of terroir, we have 4 locally foraged botanicals, so things that grow around the distillery that we go out and forage for. We have sections of land that are permitted as organic use and we can forage from them. So that's heather, bog myrtle, sorrel, and thyme. And they're just rich, pungent, floral, local botanicals that give our Botanical Spirit this kind of sense of terroir of it's our spirit and what will become our whiskey, but it's also our surroundings and what you would find if you happen to come to the west coast of Scotland for a wee trip. I'd love to know what everyone thinks of it. I know you're all on mute and you can't shout out your opinions, but if you want to type in, and I'm sure our lovely host will translate.
Also, kommt ihr soweit mit oder geht das zu schnell? Soll ich zwischendurch ein bisschen häufiger übersetzen? Kommt ihr soweit klar? Daumen hoch, okay. Da wird auch genickt, alles klar, gut.
This is good. That's easy.
Okay, but maybe you can slow down a little bit, Matt.
Of course.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, we should do it in shorter sections.
All people say it's okay. They can follow what you're saying, so it's okay. Thank you.
Okay, no worries. So yeah, that's our Botanical Spirit. It's this sort of, it was the first look at what Nc'nean would be before the whiskey arrived, and it's now this sort of continuation of the more experimental side of our distillery. Nc'nean, as a distillery, there's 2 pillars that go equally to our top line goal. Our top line goal is we want single malt Scotch whiskey to be around in 200 years' time. That's the aim of Nc'nean as a distillery. The way the Scotch whiskey industry is going currently, it will not be here in 200 years' time. It is not sustainable and is not very good at advertising to a wide audience. So Nc'nean is there to show the rest of the industry what's possible. That's probably the best way of putting it. If you'd like to translate that. Those lofty goals.
Okay, they can understand you very well.
Okay, fine. Wonderful. So we do it in a sort of a 2-pronged manner. So like I say, it's sustainability and creativity. So with sustainability, everything we do at Nc'nean is to make whiskey as sustainable as possible. We're just about to release our first full sort of carbon report. It's coming out in a couple of weeks' time. I'm meant to be proofreading it as we speak, but I'd obviously much rather be drinking whiskey in a shed than proofreading carbon reports. But the idea is every element of production and distribution is meant to be as ecologically friendly as possible. So it starts in the field with our barley. We are the only 100% organic single malt distillery. There are other distilleries that do some organic, but we are the only one that is currently 100%. Being organic, it was never a flavor choice. The flavor didn't even factor into the initial conversations. It was all about what is best for Scottish agriculture, what is best for Scottish biodiversity in farmlands, and what is best for the environment in general. And organic currently is the best solution that we have. Should that change, then we will change along with it. But we use these organic grains because, like I said, they improve Scottish biodiversity. I personally think it does have an effect on our whiskey as well. It gets down to a very sort of geeky fermentation thing where organic barley is say, farmers call it natural yielding. I'd say low yielding, but they say it's natural yield. This is how barley wants to grow. But your single stem is packing nutrients into, let's say, 8 or 10 kernels of barley versus 20, 22, like it would if it was commercially grown on a larger scale industrial farm using fertilizers and pesticides. And all that space is, yes, you get better yield, you get more sugar, you get more barley per acre of land, but you get less nutrients within the barley. And it's those nutrients that the yeast works with during fermentation to create interesting flavors. Notably for us, I think it produces something they're called long chain fatty acid esters. So it's, if you want to get very sciencey, anything with more than 14 carbons in it becomes this very long chain, and it adds weight and texture and viscosity to liquid that other esters don't. But it gives it this character, this edge. And there's nothing in our process that would suggest we make a very oily or heavy or rich spirit. But because we use this organic barley, I think we do get this very rich, creamy texture come across in the whiskey. So yeah, that's barley. The rest of the sustainability angle. So we're 100% renewable energy. So that means that our stills are powered by biomass versus fossil fuels. So 99% of the Scotch whisky industry currently uses fossil fuels to power their stills, which is why it won't be here in 200 years' time. So we harvest trees from the estate that's right next door to the distillery. So we have a really low emissions rate in transporting fuel because we don't transport it anywhere. It's just there. We grow it and we cut it down and we chip it and we burn it. It seems weird cutting down trees to be more environmentally friendly. I understand. But firstly, we replant everything that we do cut down, which adds this kind of circular economy to it. But secondly, just by using biomass versus using fossil fuels, there is immediately a 90% reduction in carbon emissions. It's a colossal carbon saving just by using biomass. And it's something that the rest of the industry is starting to take note of, which is really good fun. So Diageo have just reopened Brora Distillery, the big flagship site next to Clynelish. And they are now powering Brora using biomass, and it's because they came to visit us, had a look around, saw it was possible, and have now started affecting change on a wider scale. That's the biggest tick we could possibly have for our operations in Nc'nean, in that we've only been going for 4 years, and already the big boys are paying attention and want to copy us, because that's the ultimate goal. We want the industry to change so that all of it is here in 200 years' time, not just us. So yeah, 100% renewable energy, 100% organic. Our whiskey itself is in a 100% recycled clear glass bottle. We are the only whiskey in the world in 100% recycled post-consumer waste clear glass bottles. Just by using this, again, it's all about carbon savings. So recycled glass, not only are we diverting waste from landfill, but there's a 40% reduction in carbon emissions during production by using recycled versus clear flint glass. Clear flint glass normally requires a high amount of new material as well. It's normally like 90% new sand. And it just takes a lot more energy to melt sand into glass than it does to melt glass into glass. So recycled glass is better for the environment. The bottle itself is a really good example because it shows the sort of level of detail that Nc'nean are willing to go to. So not only is it 100% recycled glass, we print directly onto the bottle using a non-hydrocarbon-based ink. So it's a water-based ink that's better for the environment. We use a paper seal around the top, which is fully biodegradable. We use it's a bioplastic tamper seal that's made from wood pulp. So it's not real plastic that sits around the top. And again, fully biodegradable, better for the environment. and the closure, so the wood and the cork, are all natural again and all biodegradable. But because we're using natural cork, our packaging is actually carbon negative by 1.4 tons of CO2 per year currently, just because cork is so good for the environment, because it's just a tree that grows forever. You harvest it for every 7 or 8 years, and in that time, all it's done is suck carbon out of the atmosphere, and then it stays a tree and it starts again. So I like talking about the bottle, it's fun. If you want to put, should we grab a whiskey? Are we going on to batch 3?
Ja.
Ja, wonderful. Let me pour some.
Also das erste Sample, Batch Nummer 3 von dem fertigen Nc'nean Whisky.
So yeah, enough of our eco credentials. Let's talk about the whiskey. What we have in the bottle and everything that you'll taste today is what we call young recipe. So we currently produce 2 main recipes in Nc'nean and then experimental stuff. So 80% of our production is this, it's young recipe. There's a few different things that we change in the process to get, the goal is to make really, really good whiskey at a very young age. So everything that you're tasting today will be 3.5 years old, nothing much older than that in the blend, because that's how long we've been distilling. So we use a hyperclear wort if we want to get into the geeky elements of whiskey production. So that hyperclear wort just gives our yeast more room to work and more room to produce interesting flavors. We use 2 yeast strains rather than a single yeast strain for all of young whiskey production. So we refer to them by the company names that we get them from. So we call them Anchor and Fermentis. Anchor is a traditional distiller's yeast. It's like a M strain derivative, high yield, traditional Scotch flavors. It's where you're getting the caramel, the nuttiness, etc. Things that you would normally associate with Scotch whiskey. And then Fermentis is traditionally a wine yeast. So it's slightly lower yielding, but it produces loads more fruity flavors. It's where we get our stone fruit flavors, our citrus from. So there's peaches, apricots, the orchard fruits like the apples, the pears. They all come across really well because of the Fermentis. And then everything from the process goes into our signature barrel blend. We have the 2 elements to taste later today. So it's 65% STR red wine casks and 35% ex-Bourbon casks. And it's delicious. The STR casks, it's a legacy of Jim Swan. So Dr. Jim Swan was our original consulting distiller. He was the person we brought on board to establish Nc'nean, to get it up and running. He unfortunately passed away, I think 2 weeks before we started production. So we never tasted our new make, which is an eternal tragedy. But he certainly left a big imprint on our operations and what we do at Nc'nean, notably with the STR casks. So I don't know how familiar you all are with the process, but what we do in Nc'nean, we take 5 to 7 year old Spanish and Portuguese red wine casks, and then they're reconditioned. So we shave 2 millimeters off the inside of the cask to remove the spent wood and the dirt. We then re-toast and re-char the wood. And that not only reconditions the wood so it's ready for use again, but it caramelizes any residual wine sugars that are left within the oak. And that creates a big intensity of flavor very, very quickly. So we're imparting a lot of flavor, quite a lot of color very quickly as well. I can show you, I've got obviously normal cask samples here. I've got something white so I can hold them up against. So both of these liquids are 3.5 years old. On my thumb side is the ex-Bourbon cask at 3.5 years old. The first fill, that's still a good color. That's certainly more than I'd expect from a 3-year-old Scotch. But those STR casks are just so rich and quick, and it's because they develop flavor so quickly due to that STR process. I don't know where I got those from. Let's put them back for now. So yeah, batch 3. There's very little difference between our batches. In a perfect world, if I was the best blender, there would be no difference between our batches. But I'm working with what I have. I found that 3 came across much more rich texture-wise than especially batches 1 and 2. And we're coming onto a par with it now with these later batches where I think we're getting better at identifying those texture heavy casks. But batch 3 for me was very creamy and rich. So it's those long chain fatty acid esters, and they don't contribute too much in flavor. If you see them on tasting charts, they're always listed as things like cotton or wax or soap or oil. So they tend to be quite clean flavors that don't come across particularly well in your nose or on the palate. But what they do add is that texture. So when you're tasting this whiskey, it feels creamy, it feels softer, and the main benefit of that, it's not only the texture is nice, but it helps the whiskey stick to your tongue. And the longer that whiskey sticks to your tongue, the longer the finish is, the more, the longer the flavor lasts, the more intensity you get out of our spirit. So yeah, that's 3. I do like 3. It's been a while since I've tasted that. My last bit as well. Very disappointing. So I've got 5 in front of me. If we've got any questions now on what I've covered so far, that would be great. Or if not, we can just...
I have some questions.
Continue. Yeah.
Probably some such basic questions. How do you pronounce the distillery name? Nc'nean, right?
It is Nc'nean. Yeah. Nc'nean, like it's 3 syllables. Nc'nean.
And yeah, this A will be pronounced Nc'nean.
And it's, yeah, so the name is short for Nc'nean, which is the Gaelic goddess of spirits. But it's the Gaelic goddess of spirits as in ghosts and ghouls and mythical creatures, not booze. But we liked the parallel. So Nc'nean is also she's known as a protector of nature. Which is very fundamental to the brand, Nc'nean. Another thing that we found out after we'd moved the apostrophe. So previously, if you've got a first batch of Nc'nean, of the Botanical Spirit, you can see the apostrophe is sat in the middle.
Oh,
and that's because that's where the apostrophe should be. If you're shortening Nc'nean to Nc'nean, that's where you've taken the bulk of the letters out. So that's where the apostrophe should be. And it sits in the middle, and it was very symmetrical and very neat. But people struggled to pronounce that. They had no chance pronouncing this.
Okay.
So we moved it to Nuck. But after we moved it, we found out something quite neat, and it fits very well with the distillery. In that Nuck is short in Scotland for Nick, N-I-C, which is the female equivalent of Mac, M-A-C. So you have Mac as in MacDonald. Mac means son of, so MacDonald is son of Donald. Nick is daughter of, so it would be Nick Donald would be daughter of Donald. It's rarely used, obviously, because Scotland for the last 1,000 years has been a patriarchy and no one talks about women. But Nook is short is daughter of, and being a female-founded distillery, being a predominantly female-run distillery, I am very much the exception to the rule of employee gender bias at Nc'nean. We thought it fit really nicely that that Nook meant daughter of, and it fits the distillery really well.
How did you get the job, by the way?
I begged.
Really?
So I met Annabelle in Christmas, just before the whiskey was released. So they had liquid that was about 2.5 years old. I was running a whiskey bar in London at the time, and Annabelle was holding the annual shareholder meeting at the venue. So she came down for the day. This is sort of mid-December before the conference. And I had a meeting with her to set up the day's events, set up some special drinks for her and all the normal stuff. But we spent half a day together, and I'm like, you're a very cool person. I really like talking to you, like hanging out with you. I bet you'd be a joy to work for. I sort of kept that in the back of my mind. And then we tasted the liquid that she brought along. So she brought along some 2.5-year-old whiskey blended to the same ratio that we're tasting at today, so 65% SCR, 35% ex-Bourbon, and I was blown away. I thought like it was the liquid we were tasting at 2.5 years old. I couldn't believe how good it was at that age. So the combination of incredible liquid and incredible people, I was like, I must work for you, please. So I gave her my CV and I said, anything. I will sweep floors. I will run your social media. I will do whatever you have. If there's anything available, I would love to come and work for you. So after a couple of meetings, she hired me as my official job title is UK brand ambassador. So I'm meant to be looking after the on-trade and bars and restaurants and hotels in the UK. But I joined the company April 1st last year. So I've done none of that so far because everyone's been closed because of COVID. So I've been looking at the deals in general, so selling to wholesalers, retailers, etc. And I've been the blender since day one, since the first whiskey. Annabelle had bought a load of cask samples down for us to taste and to help sort of select what would be the first thing we ever released. We had a full day working on it, and she thought I did a really good job. So she said, "Excellent. Would you like to blend the next one as well?" And it's been in that position ever since.
How many people working there at the moment? How many employees do you guys have?
11, I think. Yeah, 11. 8 of which are female. So there's
you're myself, one of the lucky 3.
One of the lucky 3. Myself, Gordon, and Simon. And I'm pretty sure Simon only got the job because his wife works for us.
Okay.
So yeah, Gordon's our master distiller. Gordon spent 20 odd years working for Diageo. He used to head Oban Distillery, obviously not that far from us geographically. And Simon and his wife Sarah joined the distillery. They've led wild and interesting lives, and I think they just liked the idea of living on the west coast of Scotland and settling down a little bit. Their big story is that they've walked the length of America, quite literally, over the course of about 8 months, sort of starting down just south of the Rockies and then following the Appalachian Trail all the way up. It's quite intense. I don't think I'd like to do it, but
are you the youngest one?
No. Our head of marketing, Sasha, is a couple of years younger than me. Our head of export, Amber, who's just joined, is also younger than me. I can't think if there's anybody else. No, other than that, yeah, I'm 32. there's not that many younger than me.
Cool.
Cool.
Any other questions?
No? Wonderful. So we can taste 5 if you haven't started already. I'd love to hear what you all think the differences are between the 2 batches. Because in a dream world, you'll all say nothing, and I've done a great job. But, but there's always bits, there's always little details that we can't.
I think it's a lot creamier in the nose, the batch 3.
Really? So because we work in such small batches, maintaining consistency of flavor is really difficult. So whilst we're using the same kind of casks every time, we're using the same recipe every time, we're only working each time with 15.5-ish casks. So it really limits your palette of colors that you can paint with. It's a challenge to get the sort of a similar flavor every time. How
many casks do you blend?
So it's 15.5.
15.5 for one batch.
For a batch of Nc'nean. Sometimes the website might say 16 or 17, and it'll be that we've taken very small bits out of some casks to go in. But you'll see repeat numbers we have full batch transparency on the website, so you can see every single cask number that's gone into every single batch of everything that we've ever made. So if you see, for example, what was it, 68 and 69 from 2017, the 2 SDR casks that were both fantastic. They were hyper creamy, really buttery. So we use them as split casks quite a bit. So they were spread between a few different batches to incorporate that texture sort of evenly amongst them.
Frage in die Runde, wie gefällt es euch bisher? Wie schmeckt es euch? gibt es auch schon erste Meinungen im Vergleich von Batch 3 und Batch 5. Da kommen schon Daumen hoch, scheint gut zu schmecken. Lasst euch ruhig Zeit. Das soll ja nicht in eine Druckbetankung ausarten. So for me, Matt, batch number 5 is more fruity than number 3. It's not so smooth, but more fruits, more sweetness.
Cool.
Oh, there's an interesting question from Bruder Toby. Nc'nean offered 60 casks of New Make. Mm-hmm. Are there still some casks available?
No, unfortunately not. So we ran the cask buying program every year that we've been operating. So it's been going since 2017, and every year we release 60 casks for potential buyers to mature for their choice of years. We sort of start at 5 years. We do a 10-year option as well. And it's every distillery does it. It sort of helps funds in the early days. For the first 2.5 years, we sold out every year, but it was a bit of a struggle. It was quite hard work, but we got there in the end. As soon as we launched the whiskey, we sold out of that year's allocation, like within a couple of weeks. So we pre-launched next year's allocation and sold out of that in about a month. So we pre-launched its 2022 to 23 allocation, and that sold out within the next month. It disappears. So we've stopped the program now because we're so far ahead in sales, and we don't know if we're going to continue doing it. If it's going to be something that the distillery needs to offer moving forward. But yeah, it was a very, very popular program when people found out about it, when people heard about Nc'nean and everything that we're doing. It sold out very quickly.
But you cannot sell the bottles later, right? If you buy it privately.
I don't know
selling it only to private persons, right?
We're selling it to private customers, not to shops or anything. Obviously, we have very little control over what happens to the bottles after they've been bottled and delivered to a person, but we're not legally allowed to sell it to a company, for example, because it doesn't fall within the UK's HMRC laws. You need a different kind of warehousing license. So we're allowed to sell casks to private individuals within the standard regulations, but we don't fulfill the wider regulations for selling to businesses. We can obviously sell casks to a private company for them to use as they see fit. We just don't really. We've done one so far. We've sold one cask to that boutique whiskey company, and they have a couple more sort of on the way. But that's not an HMRC issue because that's selling a mature cask and it's going straight out of the warehouse. It's the rule is that you're not allowed to store another company's whiskey in your warehouse. You can store in individuals and you can store your own, but not a company's.
So Boutique is pretty much the only independent bottler.
Boutique is the only independent bottler currently. It's something that I'd like to do more of because there's obviously being the blender, I get to taste all the casks that we do use, and every now and again we put a few aside saying these are fantastic or these will be fantastic in a year or two's time, and I'd love them to see the light of day. And we haven't released any single casks ourselves. And when we do start releasing single casks, it's going to be a very small part of our operation. It's going to be sort of between 2 and 4 a year for the world. So we've got more good whiskey than we know what to do with. So I'd love to sell it to more independent bottlers. We've been approached by quite a few indie bottlers that I would really, really like to use.
For example?
Thompson Brothers in particular. So Thompson Brothers line up with us very neatly. So they operate Dornoch Distillery, who are of a similar vein to us. They're also organic. They're predominantly organic. They've got, I think, 10% of their production is not organic, but they're still very ecologically minded and more about the long-term future of the Scotch whisky industry. But they run a fantastic independent bottling arm called Thompson Brothers that's very, very in demand at the moment. So I would love to work with them. They've approached us and said they'd like to buy a cask. It's just when I'm allowed to sell one, which is I'm not at the moment, so I can't. Oh. Cool. So I'm going to talk about the geeky stuff now. We've had those whiskies. We can go on to the new make.
I have another question.
Oh, please go.
Before we go on, why don't you guys make smoky whiskey?
Because it's not very good for the environment. It's the short answer. I personally wouldn't be able to justify running an ecologically friendly distillery and then cutting up a natural carbon sink and burning it just so that the whiskey tastes a bit smoky. We're in a weird position because everyone that works at the distillery that likes whiskey loves peated whiskey. I love peated whiskey. And I would love to try a smoky Nc'nean in the future, but we would never peat our barley because we can't justify it. So we've spoken in the past about potentially using maybe cask finishes, like using Lefroy quarter casks like everybody else uses, but that doesn't sit particularly well with me just because I think it's not very interesting. I think a lot of people do that, and I only really want to release interesting things. So we have been researching alternate ways that we can add smoke to the whiskey with a lower carbon footprint without annoying the Scotch Whisky Association too much and sort of staying within the regulations and what's legally permitted within Scotch. But those experiments are many, many years off, unfortunately. We're not going to get there anytime soon. But yeah, that's why we don't peat our whiskey.
Okay.
So we've got some new make. I have eyeballed adding water to mine, so I have no idea how strong it is. But I believe you've got yours at 46, which is...
It's 46, I think.
Yeah, much more palatable than the 70 that I have here. We'll get onto the actual new make in a second, because I'm very proud of our new make. I think it's absolutely incredible. We'll talk about sort of what Nc'nean are doing in general. So I mentioned earlier that we have these two pillars of the business, all designed around making sure Scotch whisky is still here in 200 years' time. And we've covered sustainability to an extent. There's a million things that we do to be better for the environment and better for the planet. But we've not really covered creativity too much. So we have the Botanical Spirit, this sort of hybrid gin whiskey thing that was designed to push the boundaries of what's possible within spirits as a broader category. But a lot of what we do at Nc'nean is about pushing the boundaries of what's possible within whiskey, specifically what we can do within the very tight regulations of single malt Scotch whisky. And there's a whole world of flavour that people aren't playing with. So 80% of our production is already quite experimental by using 2 yeast strains, and just the rest of the process in general being 100% organic. That's 80% of what we produce in a year. 10% of what we produce in a year is called Old Recipe, and that's a much more traditional single malt Scotch. So it's much wider cut points, a higher yield run. We use a single yeast strain. We use Anchor, so that Emma strain derivative. So it's more traditional Scotch flavours, and it's designed for longer term maturation. I'm not even allowed to taste it yet. I've tasted the new make, but I'm not allowed to taste any of the casks. We've got 4-year-old casks, and they're like, nope, can't touch them until they're 10, so we can't touch them until they're 10. But the experimental side of what we do is that last 10% of production. So every year we have this 3 to 4 week period where we run yeast trials. So we either substitute in a new yeast, or we add a third yeast to our young recipe blend, or we can play around with barley, or we can do, there's a whole host of things, but normally it's to do with yeast. And it is about creating new and interesting flavors in New Make and then in Scotch whisky. So the yeasts that we've tried before, they've obviously all very long, geeky, numbery names that don't mean anything to anybody, but we sort of label them by what they would traditionally be used for. So we've tried rum yeasts and red wine, champagne, Chardonnay, tequila. There's this Norwegian beer yeast called Kveik, which we've run tests on, but we didn't distill, but I'm hoping that we're going to distill later this year. There's a fun yeast. So you guys are obviously familiar with Spheric Spirits. They have a program that we've sort of joined in on, and we've tested Pachia yeast through them, which is a very unusual yeast that metabolizes things other than sugar, and it produces very odd flavors. So the samples that I have behind me that I've tasted, they all kind of taste like, I was saying earlier, it tastes like cola cubes, but I believe that cola cubes don't exist in Germany, so it might be a difficult thing to explain. Cola cubes are like a small, hard, square candy, and they're meant to be cola flavored. It's meant to taste like Coca-Cola or Pepsi, but they don't. They taste like, it's almost like Amaro, but it's like a very sweet, soft, lighter version of a bittersweet liqueur. We get a lot of that from the Pachia yeast, but all of that is just about trying, like I say, throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. It's like seeing what is possible within whiskey. The experiments could be amazing, they could be bad, but we just want to do them and see what happens. And if something is really, really good, then we'll release it and we'll see the light of day. The first one should be coming out in spring next year. That's certainly the plan anyway. Of the early yeast trials that we did, they're all good, but they're not ready. So a lot of them are still quite acidic, quite bright, which means they're perfectly destined for long-term maturation. It means that so they were all wine yeasts. So like Champagne and Chardonnay were the first two yeasts that we tried, and they're very sharp still at 4 years old, 4.5 years old. So we're going to leave them for a while, and they should mature beautifully. But we tasted the red wine and the rum yeast as well. And the rum yeast we tasted at 2.5 years old, and it is unbelievable. It is so delicious, and it is so different from what you'd expect from a New Make single malt Scotch, that I can't wait to release it. So if it was ready at 2.5 years old, I can almost guarantee it's going to be ready at 3 when that happens, which I think is in January next year.
How about Calvados?
So we've not had any Calvados yeast. A lot of Calvados is sort of natural yeasts, and it's very hard to propagate, and especially hard to keep alive on the west coast of Scotland. We do have some Calvados casks. We've purchased 3 400-litre Calvados casks for finishing purposes, and I've tasted those after a few months. They're not ready. Again, quite acidic. Calvados itself, you get this kind of malic, appley acid from it, and it lends itself to longer term maturation. So Calvados casks, I think, are going to be better when they've got a bit more age and a bit more complexity to them. But some casks are much better at sort of those short term things. We've got a release coming out. Our first seasonal release is planned for later this year, and I'm not allowed to give away any details, so I'll be as vague and because I'm not allowed. But I can be vague and tell you exactly what it is at the same time. So there's a particular Hungarian sweet wine that's known for being matured in Hungarian oak. We've got some of those, and they may or may not be in the release coming out in autumn this year, and they are fantastic. They are so interesting, and it's not, for us, they've not produced the flavors that we were expecting, which is really interesting. Having tasted other Hungarian sweet wine and Hungarian oak cask finishes from different distilleries. Like Glenmorangie have just done one, and it's very sweet and it's very bright. Ours have gone in a completely different direction. The Hungarian oak for us is being much spicier and rich. When we're tasting them, we're trying to think of like a way of describing the texture, because it's not like Nc'nean is currently, where we've got that creamy butteriness. This is coming out. The best way I could think of describing it was like velvet, where it's this almost spongy, soft kind of texture, and it's delicious. Really like it, but it's hard to kind of to verbalize.
So this will be a totally new product from Nc'nean.
Yes. So the plan in the long run for Nc'nean releases, we will always have Nc'nean Organic as our core expression. We want to have one core expression. If you see a bottle of Nc'nean,
but the new one has nothing to do with the batches, right?
So the new one has nothing to do with the batch system that we currently have. We only release in small batches because that's the size of our blending tank. Like, we can only make 5,000 bottles at a time because that's literally how big the tank is. We're upgrading the facilities, and hopefully by the start of next year, we'll start making sort of 10,000 bottle batches. It will still be small, but it'll be a bit more manageable. These seasonal releases will do 2 per year. So we'll do a spring release and an autumn release. The first one will just be this year, and it'll be one release, and it's the autumn one.
The cake.
And maybe like the cake. but it's about showing off the experimental side of the distillery. So the one for autumn this year, that each one is themed. So autumn has a theme and spring has a theme, and we'll run that theme for hopefully quite a long time. But the autumn liquid theme is going to be more about the latter end of the process, so more about cask finishing and more about flavour that we can blend together at the end. Whereas the spring release will be more about flavours that we're creating. So it'll be more about those yeast experiments and barley experiments, and maybe in the future terroir. We're certainly looking at sort of possibilities for single farm releases and things like that. But that's that side.
I don't know how many bottles there will be.
This first one's going to be around 4,000, I think. Yeah. I mean, we've not blended it yet. So myself and Annabelle are going up to the distillery the first week of August. We've tasted the casks that we think we want to use, but we want to taste them and blend them as close to the bottling date as possible, so we've got more control over the flavour. So we'll.
So it will be a sweet one.
So from the test blends that I've put together so far, it's not sweet. It's coming across as that. It's that spongy texture, along with this really dry herbal spice, and it's all come together just really nicely. Like our spirit is on the sweeter side, and I think the two together have paired very, very nicely. I don't think we need to add more sweetness to Nc'nean. So it was about finding sort of other complexities that we can add to our new make.
Does it have the kind of subtitles like Tokaji finish or something?
Sorry?
Will it have a subtitle of the bottle, the sub-name of Tokaji finish or something?
So I'm not allowed to say the names, but the autumn releases going forward will have a name. So all the autumn releases will be called one thing, and then each individual batch will also have a name. So, for example, I'm trying to think of the best way of describing it. Like, it would be like a football team. So, like, the whiskey in total is football, and then the release will be Bundesliga, and then the individual one will be Bayern Munich or whatever. So, it's like, if that makes sense. But yeah, we have a name set for that one, and we have the theme that we want for spring, which I'm excited about because it's much more about nature and our world and our solar system, as it were. So that's really exciting for me because I'm a big geek, and it's all the interesting things that I like.
Cool. So there will be two special releases, kind of seasonal releases every year.
Yeah,
from autumn this year.
From autumn this year, hopefully. Fingers crossed. We have to get the bottles to arrive first. If you weren't recording, I'd pan the camera up and you can see the bottles, but we're recording, so I definitely can't do that. But anyway, yeah, this is our new make. We got very sidetracked there. So this is young recipe new make, down at 46%. So we've got that hyper clear wort, that sweet liquid that we use to ferment from. But the 2 yeast strains, so Anchor and Fermentis, so traditional Scotch, unusual wine yeast to create these very bright fruity flavors. We run really long fermentation times at Nc'nean, so everything in our system is produced as a one. So we have a 1 ton mill that feeds a 1 ton mash. The 1 ton mash perfectly feeds one 5,000 litre washback. One 5,000 litre washback perfectly feeds one 5,000 litre wash still that goes into a 3,000 litre spirit still that goes into our receiving tank. We run that process 5 days a week, and each of those 5 days are blended together into one batch of New Make Spirit that then goes into cask. So we cask every Thursday, and on that Thursday you've got 5 days worth of spirit. So in those 5 days we run 2 different recipes loosely, and it's just in fermentation time. So we run 3 fermentations at 114 hours, which is stupid long. So really long fermentation. And then we run 2 at 68 hours, which is a long fermentation. Sort of the industry standard is between 50 and 70. So we're at the sort of the top end of the industry standard for our short fermentation, and then way beyond it for the long fermentations. And that all that happens in that time. So obviously you get all of your alcohol and your main flavors in that first 68 hours. All the hours after that first 68 leading up to our 114, it's just about developing more, they're called secondary metabolites, and it's just more interesting things to come out of the yeast. It's odd flavors, it's different esters, different aldehydes, different sulfides, and they all come out of the other side as just unique flavors. And with our yeast strain, with the yeast strains that we use, it tends to be those stone fruits, so peaches, apricots, orchard fruits, apples, pears, citrus, so lemon, grapefruit, those kind of things. They come across really, really well from our new make. When you're tasting our new make, there's a thing that I'm going to say now, and every time you taste a new make, it's going to be stuck in your head forever. When you find good New Make Spirit, specifically good New Make Spirit, it has this one particular tasting that I cannot escape every time I taste it. And I don't know if you have Smarties, the chocolate sweet in Germany, but it smells like the shell on Smarties. So good New Make always smells like that shell. And it's this kind of like weird, light chocolate, but more corn starchy, clean sweetness. And I think it comes over really, really well in our new make. And I think it comes over really well in other really good new makes. Maker's Mark is one that springs to mind. If you ever taste Maker's Mark new make, it's outstanding. And it's really, really like chocolatey and tastes like Smarties.
Mm.
Yeah. You just pick up obviously our new make really showcases the viscosity that we're getting. It's not coming from the casks, it's coming from the spirit. And it's those fatty acid esters. It's why it's so buttery. It's why it sticks to your tongue and why it hangs around for a really, really long time. It's just that texture.
What is the typical Nc'nean flavor for you?
So with the new make, it's that fruity, citrusy, a little bit floral. But more than anything, there's clean. There's no heavy flavors there. There's no leather. There's no tobacco. There's no paraffin. There's no like weighty flavors. It's all about being bright and clean and accessible. The identity of Nc'nean as a whiskey, as something that's been in cask, we aim for 3 tasting notes every time. So it's lemon posset, stone fruit, and caraway rye bread. So lemon posset is that dual character of it's citrusy and it's creamy. It's got those 2 elements. Stone fruit is self-explanatory. It's the stone fruits, it's the peaches, it's the apricots. And then caraway rye bread. So again, it's that kind of dual nature of there's a bready warmth to Nc'nean. But I say caraway because we've always got this kind of, it's a light spice that is kind of, it's similar to menthol, but it's not quite there. So it's kind of, some people see it as minty, some people see it as anisette and anise, and some people see it, like me, as caraway. It's this very top note, clean, light spice. And that's, a lot of that comes from the SDR casks. Some of it comes from the New Make, but I think it's always prevalent. So they're like the 3 core flavors of Nc'nean.
So it's not really typical Highland.
No,
character. How would you categorize Nc'nean?
No, I mean,
character-wise, like, you know, Speyside, Lowland,
so
Highland.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of arranging whiskey by flavor. I've never particularly liked the region system. I think the region system is useful, but it's useful up to a point. Like saying, "Oh, this is an Islay whiskey." That's great. It kind of, it gives you a head start on what you think you can be expecting. But Bunnahabhain 12 tastes nothing like Lagavulin 16. Like there are polar opposites on the same island, and regionality, especially with everyone producing a wider range of spirits now, it doesn't make a lot of sense to categorize things as that. It loosely works from a historical perspective of, this is Islay-esque because it's very heavily peated and it's rich and oily, or this is Highland-esque because it's sort of spicy and heather honey floral and sweet, or this is Lowlands because it's very, very clean and very delicate. That loosely makes sense. But whenever we're saying that, we keep reverting to the actual flavour. So the whiskey bar that I used to run was called Black Rock. It's a whiskey bar in London. We had one briefly in Bristol as well. Every whiskey that we had there was arranged by flavour, and it was to make whiskey as accessible as possible because everyone that can taste can understand flavour. So we picked 6 categories called smoke, fruit, balance, fragrance, spice, and sweet. And that gives you just an easy head start into what you can expect from each of the whiskies that you're going to taste. But they were out in cabinets. There was no bar in Black Rock. There was nothing stopping you getting to the whiskey. You go to the cabinet and you could look at the bottles and explore. So each cabinet was labelled smoke, fruit, balance, fragrance, spice, sweet. And then the height of the whiskey in the cabinet would be its intensity. So heavier, richer stuff would have been at the bottom of the cabinet, and lighter, more delicate stuff would have been at the top. And I think that's a much better way of categorising whiskey because it makes it easy for anyone. Like a whiskey expert can go in and go, do you know what, I want this, I think it's going to be here, and they can go and find it. Or someone that knows nothing about whiskey, like literally nothing about whiskey, can go, I want something light and fruity. No problem. Go to fruit, go to the top shelf, any of those, you can pick it. So Nc'nean in that system, we'd be a top shelf whiskey. We are light, we are clean, we are delicate. And I would probably put us in fruit, possibly in sweet. There's always debates onto when we were running the bar as to where something might end up if it happened to be in a couple of categories at the same time. But yeah, I'd put us in light and fruity as sort of a baseline tasting note, and then you'd explore from there in the glass in tasting it.
Do you think it will be in 7 years' time more fruity, or rather?
In 7 years' time, I fully imagine that we'll be making a very, very similar whiskey. I don't think we don't intend to age up Nc'nean as this expression, because it's really, really good now, and it's what we set up to make. We want to make a light, fresh, accessible whiskey. It might get a bit older over the coming years. We'll be certainly adding and incorporating older stock into it, but it will always be aiming for this flavor profile, for this sort of lightness. The older stock that we have, so for example, the old recipe that we run for 10% of the year, we don't even know if we're going to release it as Nc'nean when it comes of age for us. So when I'm allowed to taste it, when it's 10 years old, if we taste it and we go, oh, this is like an old version of Nc'nean, then we might release it as Nc'nean with a different sort of sub name. to indicate this is the old stuff. It's slightly different, but it's got that character. But if we taste it in 10 years' time, it's like, wow, this is completely different. This is not like the Nc'nean that we've come to know and love over the past 7 years. Then I personally would rather we release it like Springbank release Hazelburn and Long Row, whatever it is, Long Row, where they have the different new make recipes that produce different spirits at the end. I foresee it in the same way. We have a different new make recipe, but we're changing the yeast rather than changing the peat level, and it's produced this different spirit. So we'll release it as something completely new. I've no idea what will be fun and popular in 7 years' time, but it might be. But if it doesn't taste like Nc'nean, it won't be Nc'nean. Cool. Right, that was all fun. Let's taste the really fun stuff. So cask strength, single casks. Switch that one. Which would you like to do first? Are we doing the bourbon?
Ex-Bourbon.
Ex-Bourbon?
Yeah.
Wonderful. What do I have that's good? That's probably good.
So the last two in the lineup, ex-Bourbon cask and the STR, these are basically the same spirits you use to make.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I believe the casks that we selected for you were things that we have that we've tasted when blending Nc'nean and put aside for single cask potential. So something that we've tasted and gone, wow, that's really good. We don't see a use for it in this blend, so we'll just hang on to it, and it's only going to improve. So we'll keep it for now, and when it'll either be released as a single cask by us when we start doing that, or it will be sold to an independent bottler and sold that way. Yeah, not everyone gets to taste this, so it's quite nice to share it with the world, sort of unfiltered, uncut Nc'nean, and it is very unfiltered. I imagine there's still wood chips in the bottle we gave you. So yeah, like tasting the two side by side, you can really see where we get those differences of flavour and why we blend and why we've chosen the recipe that we blend to. So our ex-Bourbon is obviously it's a good example of the distillery character, because bourbons are just less reactive casks. So it's incorporated some sweetness. So we're getting the coconut, the tropical fruit, the vanilla that you'd expect from a ex-Bourbon cask first fill. But our new make's really shining through. So there's still loads of citrus, still loads of stone fruit. And there's this kind of, like I say, it's a bready warmth. It's lunch.
Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, I think our texture really shines at cask strength. I'm certainly pushing for when we do special releases or when we do single casks, I'd love them to be at cask strength, because I think I think it sits so nicely. Like these
will it be 46%?
So ideally, if we're doing single casks, I want them at 60 or 59, whatever they come out. I can't remember what these are for you. Have you? Do you have the ABVs?
Olaf? 60 point something.
61.8.
61.8. Wow, that one's still retained quite a lot. So we cask at 63. So that's not lost. Normally, when we're tasting stuff that's 3 to 4 years old, it's coming out at 59 to 60%. So that one's still quite high, which is surprising. Yeah, all the joys you associate with cask strength whiskey, but very Nc'nean. I think that texture sits and stays. It's just that, yeah, it's creamy, it's bright, very, like, if whiskey could be refreshing, I think our whiskey is refreshing, with that citrusy stone fruits. Yeah, it's a very good example of Nc'nean.
Do you prefer bourbon cask to sherry cask?
Me personally, yes.
Yeah.
As a distillery, 10% of our warehouse is 500 litre sherry butts, roughly speaking, 10%. But none of it's ready yet, so we're not using it yet. The warehouse split is 45% ex-Bourbon casks, 45% SCR red wine casks, and 10% sherry casks. And then there's a handful of other bits.
But you are planning to release some sherry cask stuff.
So yeah, it's a weird one with what we want to do with Nc'nean as a recipe. It might be that we start incorporating sherry into the recipe that we currently have, and it just becomes part of Nc'nean, our brand identity, depending on how it tastes. Or it might be that we release a second product that focuses on the sherry casks. Or it might be that we save them and we use them for special things. So we use them for single cask releases, or we use them for the seasonal releases. As there's no definitive plan for them yet because they're not ready. So we want to get them. We want to get them ready first. So we'll taste them, and when they are ready, then we'll decide what to do then. I know Anna's quite keen to start slowly incorporating sherry. The early recipes that we ran, sort of deciding the balance on ex-Bourbon to STR ratio and do we want to include sherry. One of the first things that I tasted was a 60-30-10 blend, so 60% STR, 30% ex-Bourbon, and 10% sherry. And it was good. It was really delicious, and it did add like an extra fruity quality to it. But the sherry casks just weren't ready at the time. It's possible they might be ready now. We've not tasted any for about a year and a half, but they were just a bit too vibrant, a bit too sharp.
What kind of sherry casks do you guys have? So
we have all of the ones that we have are 500 litre traditional, but I believe they're all Oloroso, as far as I'm aware. We have 2 sherry hogsheads that are of age. So there's so they're like 220, 230 litres sherry conditioned casks, American oak, but not previously used other than for sherry. One of those was Pedro Jimenez, and one of those was cream, so like a sweeter blend. I've tasted both of those. The PX is intense. I think it's a useful sort of tool. It'd be really good for using in blending, but I don't think it's good enough to release on its own. But the cream is incredible, like a really, really good sherry hogshead. And I believe, yeah, you're recording. I believe it's being released as a single cask, potentially, in a country beginning with G. I don't know, maybe, but I think that's what's happening.
Georgia or somewhere.
Yeah, at some point later this year, I believe there is a single cask coming to a country beginning with G that might possibly have been a cream sherry hogshead. I think that's a good way of phrasing that. I can't guarantee it, but I'm fairly certain that's what's happening. But yeah, that was really good. That was everything that we wanted from a smaller sherry cask. It's got like a big hit of intensity and fruit and richness, and again a lot of texture, a lot of butteriness and creaminess and viscosity, and it's really good liquid. I really hope that gets released, and I really hope I get a bottle, because if it's being released in a country beginning with G, then I'll need to find a friend that can get me one.
You have 11, I think. You have already 11 friends, or 10.
Perfect. God, that's delicious. So yeah, that's hopefully going to happen. I believe the plan is that there's going to be 2 single casks this year. One of them will be an exclusive to a country beginning with G, and one of them will be a UK exclusive. that's going for a specific retailer. So we've partnered with a store to release one in the UK, and then a exporter beginning with K have a cask going to a country beginning with G. So yeah, that's all of the plans for this year, hopefully.
That's a great information.
Get your pre-orders in now. Right. What did everyone think to that, by the way? I realised we've not been asking questions. I've just been randomly chatting to Massa while you're all on mute.
Feedback?
Ja, habt ihr Anmerkungen dazu? Wie gefällt euch das? Wie gefällt euch jetzt der Unterschied von diesem fassstarken Bourbon Cask zu den normalen Nc'neans, die bereits als Whisky abgefüllt worden sind? Ihr könnt gerne was dazu schreiben, über Zeichen signalisieren, ob es euch gefällt oder nicht gefällt. Der Matt fragt gerade nach so ein bisschen Feedback.
Hopefully the feedback's not me. Oh, it stopped when I started talking. That's not a good sign.
Okay, does anybody have some sound problems? Sabine is talking about that. But she likes the bourbon cask whiskey. It's actually my favorite too. It's very powerful, very strong. It's really, really good, I think.
Excellent. Cool. From the limited German that I can understand, the chat seems very nice. So,
batch 5 was liked by Thomas, and the ex-Bourbon is really good.
Awesome. Cool. Well, let's go on to the final element. Oh, need to unmute Massa, bless him. So yeah, if you've not already, you can pour out the STR. So that's shaved, toasted, and recharged. It'll be a Portuguese red wine cask, I believe. You don't have to feel sorry about liking batch 5 better than batch 3. If anything, that means I'm getting better at my job. There was a whole 2 batches later. Cool. So yeah, STR, as I said, it's the Jim Swan legacy cask. It's his baby, his project. So sort of a culmination of different elements that he'd put together to try and make really good whiskey at a really young age. So he sort of led the yeast experiments. It's why we have that 2 yeast blend as our main recipe. It was his plan. Everything's kind of a trade-off. So to make a very light, clean, good new make spirit, we have that hyper clear wort where you're going to sacrifice some elements of traditional Scotch barley flavors, but you've got more space for yeast to work. And then having that 2 yeast blend and having really long fermentation times bumps up the flavor, gives it more room to play. Running fairly tight cut points on the stills so you get a very, very bright and clean new make spirit. And then it goes into these STR red wine casks. So you're incorporating a lot of flavor and a lot of color and a lot of intensity very, very quickly into the liquid. And for me, the STRs is where we get, there's obviously a lot of fruitiness coming from those reconditioned red wine casks, and it's more along the lines of darker fruits. It's where we're getting more of our red berries and forest fruit sort of flavors coming from. But it also adds this incredible element of spice. So it's very, very bright, top note spicy. I think this is where we get those caraway, menthol, anisette kind of notes, where there's a herbal element to these casks. And especially compared to the bourbon, so much more intensity, so much more richness. Obviously, it's a cask strength, so it's going to be big. But they're big and they're fun to work with.
There's another question coming in, Matt.
Oh, please.
Mina wants to know what's which with the batches 5, 4, and 6. Are there any differences to number 3 and 5?
So difference-wise, it should be of a similar sort of vein. So we build each batch that we've done so far to the exact same recipe. So every single Nc'nean release so far. So I've blended 8 batches. I think there's 6. I think 7 is almost in Germany. I think it's at the border. It'll be available soon. And 8 is still being bottled. So all of those follow the same recipe of 65% STR red wine casks, 35% ex-Bourbon cask. Everything is around 3.5 years old. Everything more or less is from top row in our warehouse. So we use traditional dunnage warehousing. So you've got 3 layers of casks. And obviously on that base layer, it's more suited to long-term duration just because it's colder on the floor and you get less movement in the casks, you get less influence from the wood immediately. So everything we've released so far has all been from row A, the top row. So it's slightly warmer and there's more shift in temperature and it's just more interaction with the wood. So everything's 15.5-ish casks. So each batch that's released, we aim for those same sort of 3 flavor notes of lemon posset, stone fruit, and caraway rye bread. And each one is there's slight differences between them, just because there's always going to be variances when you're working in such small batches. Off the top of my head, I found 4 spicier. I found the STR casks to have more influence on batch 4 personally, similar to the way they do in batch 5, where when you say there's more fruit and there's a bit more spice and a bit more intensity, it's just the STR playing a heavier role than you'd expect. And I haven't tasted 6 since I blended it, so I can't remember. But hopefully similar-ish to all the other ones.
I have to buy the batch 6 if you blended it yourself.
I blended all of them myself. Everything that Nc'nean has ever released, I have blended.
Cool. Including
Eine, the private bottling at the start. That was the first whiskey I have ever blended commercially, not just for myself because I like blending whiskey.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool. I'm a very, very lucky person. Also, like, you normally get like this little bit of licorice from our STR casks, that kind of darker sweetness. Yeah, yummy. Really yummy.
What's your favorite STR cask bottlings from any other distilleries? Do you have any?
I love Kilchoman STR. The Kilchoman STR is incredible. Who else makes? So actually, I really like the Cotswolds as well. I know the Cotswolds have their Founders Reserve, which is pure STR cask, and I believe it was created for commercial reasons, not for any love of STR casks. But I genuinely think that's a really, really good whiskey. And obviously, you're only really going to find STR casks at Jim Swan Distillery, so they've all got his sort of stamp, and they're all of a certain quality.
Which one?
The Cotswolds.
I did. Okay, Cotswold. No.
Yeah. So, so yeah, I mean, I don't think I've seen distilleries outside of ones that Jim Swan has had some connection to use STR casks, as far as I'm aware. If they are, then I'd love to taste them, because it would be interesting, especially seeing how STR casks work with a new make spirit that he's not been involved in creating, because they're so intense and they're so rich. So partnering that with something that say is traditionally rich from the start, so something like Old Pulteney or Highland Park, I'd love to see how their new make interacts with an STR cask, because that would be sort of doubling down on intensity, having really intense new make spirit followed with really intense casks, and seeing what happens. That would be fun. Thank you to people for writing in English in the chat. That makes my life much easier. I don't have to quickly Google translate it. Lovely, yeah, nice and floral. I fully agree. And Hubert, I don't know how you pronounce that in German. Yes, I would agree about sort of salt levels and proximity to the sea. I certainly think it influences our casks. So our casks are aged by the sea. Our warehouse overlooks the Sound of Mull. So that's the channel of water separating the Isle of Mull from mainland Scotland. So we do have a constant sea breeze. We have our own microclimate on that small patch of the west coast of Scotland. And I do think that there is a sort of a salty element of our whiskey. We notice it especially in tasting. So our signature serve for the whiskey is a whiskey 6, so whiskey soda with fresh mint. And soda waters in general have varying levels of mineral salts in them. It's why they're soda waters versus sparkling water. It's to do with the level of sodium and different elements within them. If we find particularly salty soda waters and pair them with our whiskey, we get very, very salty drinks. So something like London Essence, I don't know if they distribute to mainland Europe, but London Essence makes soda water, and it's on the saltier side of soda water. And when you pair it with our whiskey, I personally love it because I'm a salt fiend. I love anchovies, I love olives, I love anything very heavily salty. So I think that's delicious. But we've given it to some people and they've gone, oh, it's a bit too much. It's a bit too rich. Whether that salt is anything to do with our climate and being close to the sea, or if it's just something that comes across in a different part of the process, I'm not sure. I mean, there are distilleries that very famously claim to be salty because they're made by the sea. Notably, I don't want to name any names, the big one on Eine claims to be salty because it's made by the sea, even though every single cask is aged in Glasgow. Because they haven't any warehousing on site at all, so there's no way they can claim it's to do with the salt air of the sea. But it is a salty whiskey, so I don't know where else in their production process that sort of these minerals come from, but they're certainly present in the end.
Any more questions?
Thomas, I'm glad you like the STR. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good. I'm brewed as well. Cool. I'm glad you all like the STR. The STR is fun because we get a lot of mixed feedback from the STR casks. And it's because of their intensity, because they produce fairly consistent flavors. A lot of people kind of sort of complain that, oh, it's the same, or it's boring, or you know what it's going to taste like. But it's nice introducing it to new people because I think it's even if it is kind of the same, I think it's really, really good. It's sort of complaining that your Michelin star restaurant tastes the same. Like it's still a Michelin star restaurant. Like it's so yeah, it's nice hearing positive feedback on it for a change. Cool. Well, I'm here for as long as you need me. If you have any questions at all about anything to do with Nc'nean or Scotch whiskey in general. Or
what's your favorite whiskey?
My favorite whiskey? That's impossible.
All-time favorite. Let's say three. Name three.
Favorite. Name three. I adore Hakushu 12 when it was available. Just that lightly peated, floral Japanese whiskey. I think it's heaven. For the longest time, and I've not tasted it in a few years, and I believe it's changed slightly, but before they did the rebrand, for a really long time, Loch Lomond 12 was incredible. Loch Lomond 12 was a really, really good whiskey, and it cost nothing. It was like 30, 40 euros a bottle. Because it's made at this monolith distillery in Balloch. I
actually started to like them since the owner changed.
Yeah,
and before that, I couldn't drink them.
But I'm a big fan of Loch Lomond. There's very few whiskies I've tasted from them that I've disliked, and the quality that they're producing, they can't be beat on price. They're so competitive on price. They're a really good whiskey that costs very, very little. And just the way they operate their program as well, it's a breath of fresh air compared to the rest of the Scotch whisky industry. So they've got multiple sets of stills. There are multiple different recipes. They're one of the only other distilleries in Scotland other than ourselves that are experimenting with yeast. So they've run a few different like Chardonnay. They've got like a South African Chardonnay yeast that they use quite often for experiments. So that's super interesting. They've got the copper column coffee still, which is just really cool. So they run their grain spirit through there. So they have a grain whiskey, but it's 100% malted barley. It's just run through the coffee still. And again, that is really,
that was fantastic.
Really good. Yeah, and it costs nothing. And
it's like just $20 or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
24.
Yeah, dirt cheap, really tasty, and it's interesting as well because no one else has a copper column coffee still. And then just the Lomond stills themselves. So the still that was invented for Loch Lomond, where you've got, it's a pot still, but with variable cut points in the neck. So you can have 3 different styles of new make from the exact same run. That's really cool. So yeah, they're interesting. And then last one. Okay, as I said, I'm a salt fiend. So Bruichladdich, when they did the Laddie 10, so when they still have the age statement on the Laddie.
Adam would be happy to hear.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great whiskey because again, it's just so salty, and I know that there's lots of talk about like sort of terroir in whiskey, and it's to do with the barley or to do with the peat and how it's produced or whatever. I don't know how well that flows through the process, but if I could pick something that tastes like that spot on Islay, like Laddie 10 tastes like you're hanging out in that weird little coastal port of Islay. Like it's just got that vibe to it, and it's delicious. I really, really like it.
How about classic Laddie?
So yeah,
compared to the Laddie 10.
Compared to the 10, I think it comes across as sweeter, and I don't know if that's like an active decision that they've made because they're picking younger casks or what. I'm not involved in their blending process, so it's still really good, but if we're talking about top 3 whiskies that I adore, it doesn't come close.
In Laddie 10, I had a lot more eggs in it than in classic Laddie.
Yeah.
A lot more eggs.
Eggs?
Yeah.
Okay, like sulfurous. Yeah, that makes sense.
Hard-boiled eggs.
Hard-boiled eggs.
Yeah, when I tasted the Laddie 10 for the first time, I had eggs.
Ah, that's weird. Because what do Bruichladdich use for condensers? They don't use worm tops, do they?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Probably, yeah.
I mean, that would make sense because if it's younger and if they've got inefficient copper working at the other end, then there's less chance for those sulfides to have dissipated away in the maturation process. So yeah, it would taste eggier. There would be more.
It tasted eggy.
Yeah, there'd be more. It's not sulfur dioxide. What is it? Sulfates. So different sulfur compounds that taste like vegetables and matches and eggs. Yeah.
Yeah. That was interesting.
That's cool. I'm trying to think if there's any other great whiskies that I've completely missed out. There was the whiskey bar that I ran, obviously a shameless plug for the whiskey bar I used to run, but BlackRock had their own half cask of Chichibu bottled about 2 or 3 years ago now. And I don't know where it sits on my sort of all-time whiskey list that I can come up with off the top of my head, but it was absolutely incredible, and it's certainly the best Chichibu I've ever tasted. So it was a reused peated Han-Yu cask for like a 4-year-old Chichibu, and it was just everything that you wanted from a slightly smoky Chichibu, really round and oily and complex and just neat and at cask strength, and everything works really, really well. If you ever see a bottle of that pop up on auction, snap it up. It's great.
That was some money.
Yeah, money. I think it's about $1,000 now. So what's that, like 1,100 euros ish? What it normally goes for now,
if not more.
But it's good. It's certainly better than the sexy fish one that goes for $3,000.
What's the most expensive whiskey you bought yourself?
I've bought for myself.
Yeah.
Not a lot. I don't buy expensive whiskey. I can't afford it.
You could taste everything in your bar or not?
Oh yeah. Oh, so like for the bar, yeah, we had what was the most expensive? We used to sell the Yamazaki 18 Mitsunura cask for like £200 a shot or something.
£200 a shot.
Yeah, that was good. That's probably the most expensive. But actually, no. So I've also sold. So we when we had BlackRock, we ran a pop-up version of BlackRock in Hong Kong. We'd hired out a private room inside of a bar. Recreated the entire experience, partnered with Diageo, and we had a range of whiskies out there. In Hong Kong, they're partnered with LVMH, so we had a load of Glenmorangie and Ardbegs as well. But we had like the full Diageo range, and we had the full special releases. So we had that year's Port Ellen and Brora, and they were great, especially the Brora. So the Brora was half the price, and it was still about £200-ish a shot. The Port Ellen was about £400 a shot. But that Brora was absolutely incredible. I can't remember what year that was. I think that was 2017 special release. I think it was the last year that they did Port Ellen within the special release portfolio as a common entrant. And they were good. But yeah, I think the most expensive bottle I had at home, my parents bought me a bottle of Tomatin 30 for my 30th birthday, which was absolutely incredible. That's a really
Tomatin 30.
Tomatin 30, really good dram. Batch one of the wood presented. It's here. I have the box. Batch one of this box.
Oh yeah. I had the 36 years. Yeah.
Oh, cool. So yeah, just the 30. That was lovely. I really enjoyed that as well. That's probably the most expensive thing I had at home. Everything else is I buy whiskey that's like £50 to £60 because that's sort of where I'm comfortable. I might stretch to 100 if it's really special, but I can't justify spending that much money. I can't justify spending that much money on whiskey for myself when.
What are your daily whiskeys?
When I blend whiskey for a living and I have access to whiskey that no one else can taste.
we can see some of your whiskeys. All of them are Nc'neans, behind you.
Yeah, that's all. So they're all different yeast trials. So the Pichia, the rum yeast, the red wine, the Chardonnay. They're batch recipes. So when I create a batch, I run a few different cask variations to see what works. So that's all of those. The different cask finishes. So we've got the non-specified Hungarian oak down there. Some tequila casks, some Calvados casks. That's an empty box because that's the Eine, which I finished, which was delicious. And yeah, we can't look up there yet because you're still recording.
Confidential.
Okay, I think there are no more questions. Or if you want to, you got a last chance. I don't think so.
Feel free to unmute people if you want, and we can have a chat. I have no plans. I'll have to go home and build a bed for my daughter. So the longer I stay here, the less DIY I have to do tonight.
Where are you now?
I'm at so I have it's a shed. It's literally a shed. So you can see, like, blending stuff, and then bookcase that we can't go all the way up on, and then a little sink, and glassware for cocktails. Yeah, it's a shed.
I see a guitar.
Oh yeah, there's a guitar. It's normally there, but I hide it because I can't play very well. And whenever it's on show on Zoom calls, everyone's like, "Can you play guitar?" I'm like, no, I can't. I'm still learning. I'm not very good, so I try to hide it.
There's some Ed Sheeran.
Yeah, not going to happen. But yeah, it's a shed. It's just up the road from my house. I'm in Buckinghamshire, so it's
small bossy.
It's just outside of London. I live in the south of England.
Nice. I read that you study photography, and then you did some bar jobs and get to the Ambassador. So is your hobby or is your job photography now? You can use it at the distillery.
Yes, yeah. So
for marketing or something else.
Yeah. So photography, I do about 80% of the photography for Nc'nean. So if you're on our Instagram page or anything, or if you go onto our website, I've taken most of those photos. My background, so I went to university to study photography, and I initially trained and was a fashion photographer for like this long. I don't know if you've ever had the privilege of working in fashion. It's horrible. Don't ever do it. So I did it for a few months and decided it wasn't for me. And I'd been bartending previously when I was at university. So I just went back to bartending and happened to fall into a very good bar with very nice people, and fell in love with bartending, with the bar culture. It's already been part of my life. My parents were publicans. My grandparents on both sides were publicans. So I've always been around and in working in bars, or been with people that are working in bars and pubs. So yeah, it was just a really nice fit, and I really enjoyed it. So I stayed doing it for, well, I worked specifically in hospitality for 16 years. I know I'm quite young, but I started working when I was 14. So restaurants and stuff, and then eventually bars. And I'd gained enough of a reputation for myself and enough experience and enough quality that I started working for a consultancy company called Fluid Movement. And with them, we created bar concepts, and we trained in bar programs around the world, writing menus for people, writing drinks for people, training people how to make classic cocktails, how to create their own interesting drinks. And so I did that for 5 years, and then I met Annabelle, and I wanted to work for Nc'nean, so I did.
Why didn't you like it working in the fashion industry?
Fashion industry, just not nice people.
They don't drink, right?
Oh no, they drink. They drink a lot. Just it's not a comfortable work environment. It's because everyone is very blunt and everyone's very image focused and everyone's very best way of describing it nicely. There really isn't one. Egotistical is probably the best way of describing it. I don't mind a bit of ego. I'm certainly more than happy to brag about myself every now and again. But when it's part of your core identity, it becomes very tiring, and it's just not it's not enjoyable. I never woke up one morning as a fashion photographer thinking, God, I can't wait to go to work. Like it didn't ever happen. Even though I loved photography, I still do. But it's much nicer taking photographs of drinks and whiskey than it is of clothes.
From Gunther, Matt, you are a good storyteller.
Oh, thank you. I don't think I am. Especially not after a few drams. I know I talk too fast anyway, so talking too quickly to a bunch of people where English is your second language or third language is not ideal.
Have you been to Germany?
I haven't, unfortunately.
You haven't?
No, it's long been on my list. Especially because the rest of my family have been to Germany. I just never got the chance to go. I was always busy. One of my sister's best friend was in Berlin for a while, so she used to come over quite frequently. But I've never had the privilege. I've heard it's very clean.
We will have a special release this autumn from Nc'nean. Most probably we will get some bottles. You know,
that's a good point.
To buy.
Yeah,
why don't you come over?
I should probably head over to get some. Yeah. That's not a bad idea. I know, so we have our export manager, Amber, and I know she's certainly starting to look like she's going to be actually traveling to accounts and seeing people more often. All of our export contracts are currently in Europe. We don't distribute very widely because we don't make a lot of whiskey. We already have more demand than we can fulfill, and we're only in 4 countries. So expansion's a little bit out of the way. But when she's traveling again, I think I'm going to join her for a few days at a time at least, just because I quite like talking about whiskey to people that like hearing about whiskey, and I like visiting different countries. That was the best part of being a bar consultant, was travel. We've set up I've set up and trained concepts in Los Angeles, New York, Abu Dhabi, Melbourne. We did work in Egypt, in Hong Kong. It was fun.
How about Japan?
Never been to Japan. Do you know, when we were working in Hong Kong, we seriously considered we had one day off, and we seriously considered waking up at 4 a.m, flying 4 hours to Japan, going to Bar High Five, having a few highballs, and then flying back. Just because we could. It was technically possible, but the day that we did have off, we got called in, so we couldn't do it. But yeah, I'd love to go to Japan. It sounds incredible.
Yeah, sometime in the future, probably.
Yeah. As soon as I can afford it, I will definitely go out there. I'm quite good friends with the UK brand ambassador for Suntory whiskey, James Bowker. He lived in Japan for 6 months, I think, and visits very frequently because he works for Suntory.
Cool. Why don't you work for Suntory, like taking pictures? Most probably you get lost in translation.
Do you know, he's never asked me to take any photos, so I've never done it for him. There's different levels of drinks photography, and I know Suntory in particular. The photographers they like to work with people like Adi Chin and Rob Collins, who are immaculate. I'm quite loose. I see nice things and I take pictures, and then I make them look how I want them to look. Rob and Adi plan meticulously for the image, and I mean I've assisted for both of them in the past and helped them work. Like I will take and be happy with 20, 30, 40 photos a day comfortably. If Adi gets 5 photos a day, that's a really good day for him. Like a really good day. Everything is planned to perfection, and then set up, like even setting up lights and stuff. He'll be there for an hour or 2 hours, just getting everything exactly how he wants it before we've even considered pouring a drink. And then you'll make a drink, and then you'll spend another half an hour fussing over it, and then you'll make it again because it's gone flat. But yeah. Different styles, which is probably why I've not worked for Suntory. It's much better working for someone like Nc'nean, where everything's a bit more, natural, a bit more loose.
Okay. If there are no more questions, there's a quote from Toby. It seems to be an invitation, Matt. You have to come to Germany and we meet.
That would be great.
Dort in Oberhausen.
I have a very long list of bars I need to see in Germany, so I'd be more than happy to come and see you all.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this evening. It was very interesting to learn a lot about Nc'nean. I like the whiskeys you produce. I hope you do it furthermore, blending whiskey like this.
Thank you.
We're waiting for some special bottlings, maybe single cask. Probably a country with G will get.
Promise nothing.
Thank you very, very much. Have a nice evening, and see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. No, thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. Have a good night, guys.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good evening. Thank you, everyone.